Welcome to Pencils and Lipstick. This is a podcast for indie authors. I'm Kat Caldwell, novelist, short story writer, and book coach. Here on Pencils and Lipstick, we're obsessed with all things story, and it is my goal to bring you the writing tips that you need to make your novel come to life. Hello, everyone. It is the end of March, and this is episode 262 of Pencils and Lipstick. I'm Kat Caldwell, the hostess of the show, and today we're going to have an interview, so you won't have to just listen to me. We're going to be talking about editing with Rebecca Pickens, and she has an interesting way of breaking it down in like a roadmap way. I know editing is talked about. It's like half of the process of bringing a book out, but somehow it's not always talked about in a helpful way. A lot of writers dread editing, and we talk about that. Then when you get past a certain point, you actually look forward to editing, and we talk about that. And so Rebecca teaches it in, like, she calls it the macro, the micro, and the granular. So we're going to get into what she means by all that. And she runs a group that you might be interested in, whether you are a first-time book writer or a umpteenth time book writer. Sometimes being part of a group for that editing process can be really beneficial to keep you on track, to keep you encouraged, and to keep you going. So we're going to talk about all of that stuff. If you have not listened to the podcast before, you can subscribe to it so that you get notified every Monday when a new one goes out. If you want to see me or my guests, you can listen to us on YouTube. Pencils and Lipstick over there. And let's see. Yeah. If you've been listening or you are new, subscribing on whatever podcast app you listen to is really beneficial to the show. If you like it or give a little review, that is also beneficial. I think we're kind of like on some old reviews there. So it'd be wonderful if you would just say, listen every week, or love the tips, or love the interviews, whatever. Reviews don't have to be hard. They don't have to be like paragraphs. And share with your friends, all your writer friends. That's also really beneficial. This is all free. And if you get on my newsletter, that's free. If you do want to support me and keep the show running and all the things, you can support me on Substack at lessonsinstory.substack.com. If you are a paid subscriber, you get access to all the critiques that I receive on my short stories when I submit them for contests. You can read the short stories as a free subscriber, but you get access to the critiques and what judges say. And I think that it's an interesting thing to be part of when you're a writer, that you can read how judges critique work, right? Because that is also kind of a behind the curtain thing. Like, why was my work not accepted, or why did it not win, or whatever? And a lot of times we don't actually know the reason. If you're querying agents, a lot of times they say it's not a good fit for us now, and that doesn't really help us, right? So these are critiques from judges, because I write stories for competitions. That's just my way of doing it. I love writing short stories, and I love getting that feedback on what they say. And so I've put a couple out there, and I'll be putting more. So you're supporting me, you're supporting the podcast, and you get to see why a judge would pick one over the other. And I've only ever won one contest, so it's definitely why they passed on mine versus going on to whoever won, right? And always know, just like books, there are like hundreds of people competing for these contests, right? So we're always in high competition with people, all trying to do the same thing. And a lot of times it has nothing to do with whether yours was bad. It's just that they had to choose. They had to nitpick. I mean, I had a spelling mistake in one of my, such a bummer, right? And like, if you have to choose between, if you have to let go of a couple stories, the one that has a spelling mistake, like, that's what I would do. I would get rid of that one, say, I'm sorry, and it was one of those spelling mistakes where, like, it is another word, so it's like the pro writing aid or whatever, the AI doesn't see it because it is spelled correctly. It's just the wrong word. those are a bummer, you know? Anyway, so if you want to support me and the show monetarily, you can support me on lessonsinstory.substack.com. You can also buy my books, you know, they're everywhere. So just a little announcement on books before we get into the interview. I finally finished Across the English Channel. I know it's like this is the one that I've called Philip and I've called Dowser and I've called so many things. It is the historical romance, and I'm so excited. See, if you're watching, that's the first one there. And the second one is finally coming out, and it's given me some energy to continue on to writing the novella, and then I will be writing the third one, and I'm so excited for it to just kind of be done. I do have another idea for a little novella for Philip and Carmen's son. But anyway, we'll see. That might be like a little surprise. So I am actually looking for ARC readers if you like historical romance. And believe me, this historical romance is closed door. There's very little, no, there's no like trauma. You know how my contemporary fiction has like abortion and abuse and things. It has like trauma that the female's always getting over. And even the first historical romance does as well, but this one does not actually. So it is closed door and it's pretty sweet, honestly. There's a little angst because it's romance. You got to have like some angst in there, right? So it is very much, even though it's closed door it has the essence of Laura Kinsale and Lisa Kleypas, because those are the women that I used to read and just adored for a long time. And they're kind of the inspirational authors to the first historical romance. So if you like sort of that historical romance, this one is set between Spain and England, and it deals with a Protestant marrying a Catholic. That's a little subplot to it. So that is going to come out end of May. And if you want to be an ARC reader, which an ARC reader is like, if you like the book, if you want to finish the book, I just ask that you give it a review at some point and you will get lots of information. But there's just a little link to say I'm interested. It is not sealed, you know, it's not written in stone. So you can always back out. But more information will be given mid to end of April, sort of when everyone's done with their spring breaks. So if you're interested, click the link below. There's going to be a lot of links today in the show notes because Rebecca has quite a few things for you guys. But we are going to get into the interview. Rebecca Pickens is a certified book coach and editor, and she's also the host of Self Editing Essentials, a group coaching program for writers with finished or almost finished manuscripts. And it is a group for fiction and memoir writers. She works with writers at all stages of the creative journey to help them finish and get their stories into the hands of ideal readers. She is also in the writing trenches alongside you. During long winters in the northern New York, she writes literary fiction. In the bright bursts of summer, her attention turns to flash fiction. Her short fiction has been nominated for the Penn Robert J. Dost Short Story Prize for Emerging Writers, and most recently, the Pushcart Prize. Yay! So we will be having lots of links below where you can find Rebecca, where you can set up a call to talk to her more about the Self-Editing Essentials group. And there's a little freebie down below where you can get this sign up for her newsletter and you can get this little workbook from her as well. So she's been very generous with you guys. So definitely go check all of those out and find out more about Rebecca. But before you do that, listen to the interview. Hello, Rebecca. How are you doing today? I'm so excited to talk to you.
Hey, Kat, it's so great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm glad that we're going to talk about this topic. We talk about editing a lot as writers, right?
Absolutely.
It's a big topic. But you have a different way of editing, so we're going to talk about that. But before we go into that, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Thank you, Kat. So yeah, my name is Rebecca Pickens, and I'm a certified book coach and a developmental editor. And I'm the host of a group coaching program for fiction and memoir writers who have finished or almost finished writing their manuscript and are getting ready to start thinking about editing themselves, to start looking at how to do some self-editing. And I am also in the trenches with all you writers. That is how I spend every free second of my time, is working on my own work. I do short fiction, and I also am at work on a novel right now. So
Nice.
I know how it feels.
So you decided to make this group because there's lots of different writing groups, right? Like lots of people have sort of these memberships, and most of them have to do with like getting started or pushing through, but you really focus on you have something written or kind of almost done or like what you think is done. Is that right?
Yeah, you're exactly right. So, sometimes people aren't sure if they're done.
Well,
And
yes.
this program can also be really helpful for them because they know they just keep going back over and over, repeating kind of the same exercises, and they're not really feeling like they're getting further.
Yeah.
And so I might suggest that that person is ready to start calling what they're doing editing rather than
Mm-hmm.
writing. So, yeah, there are people in our group who are sort of on both sides of the spectrum. Some have even been through a developmental edit already, and they got given a lot of great feedback, but now it's that overwhelm again, like, okay, what do I do with all this
Yeah.
feedback?
Yeah.
So yeah, I got the idea for this program because as a developmental editor, I work with amazing people who have amazing ideas, but I was getting sad because I was seeing too many of them come to me too early.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is these were smart people, and I knew that if they had the tools, they could bring a manuscript to me that was more polished than what
Mm,
they were bringing, and that in turn I could give them much higher level edits.
right.
And so I wanted to save people from that, right? Because
Yes.
that's an expensive investment, and it's an amazing investment when you're ready for it, but not prematurely. And also, even for those who weren't approaching editors, but who were just approaching beta readers or family members to read their
Mm-hmm.
books, they were bringing those too soon, and so they were getting feedback that felt like a little bit frustrating, sort of
Yes.
hearing, things that they knew already, and then they felt discouraged because they had kind of blown their chance with having that person read their work with fresh new eyes.
It's so hard, isn't it?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
we're all readers. Most writers are readers. So you have like this intuition, right? I'm like, I'm gonna write a book and I know how to write a book. Yeah, I know a story. And then you start writing it, you're just like, I don't know.
absolutely, absolutely. And that objective eye that we need to have as an editor is something we can train ourselves to do. I think I'm always going to recommend that people get outside feedback. I think it's
Right.
just part of the process, and it's a joyful process to kind of hear how people
Mm-hmm.
are responding to your story. But I do believe that there are ways to train ourselves as
Right.
writers to develop objective eyes, and not when we're writing the book, right? Like that's not the time to wear the editor's hat. But
Right.
when a writer is ready, then putting on that editor's hat, learning how to look at our work in an objective way and looking for very key components of what makes a novel or a memoir work, I
Right.
believe we can all do that. And what I really want to do is empower writers with these tools because I think they're important.
Yeah.
And I think that the tools they learn can be used in any kind of writing they do.
Yeah.
So it's really something you're learning it for this novel, but you're also going to take it,
Yeah.
to every other piece of work you do. So yeah, so I just really wanted people to have access to these tools. And I love editing. And I know that's not a popular feeling amongst a lot of writers. And I want more writers to enjoy the process
Yes.
because I really think I think it's the best part. I think it's our reward for working so hard at writing our stories is to get that chance.
Yeah. I mean, I remember somebody saying that at the very beginning of this podcast, and that was almost 6 years ago, and I was like, what? you know, but now I get it because for me, it's like at least I have a draft to edit. But I think it's the in this day and age, like it's so expensive, right? It's all on you. You're supposed to just know, even if you Google stuff, you don't really know what's going on. Like,
Mhm.
I'll be like, what does it mean to flesh out a character? What, like, whatever. So it's a lot of pressure to be like, is it ready? Is it not ready as a new writer? And then it feels like a personal attack When somebody says, I don't think this book is ready, and you go, but why? So I get it. But now I love it because I can go further and deeper into it. So I think that's just part of growing. And so I think what's really great is that you have this option for writers that I didn't have a decade ago, where you can learn what's going on before you go to an editor who has edited dozens, if not hundreds of books. And they are no longer like, they're on your side, but they're like, I'm not going to spend the time when it's not ready. You know what I mean? They'll send it back.
Right, right.
So we need to, but there's that frustration, that black hole. What
Mhm.
does it mean? So what, I know you're saying, like, when you think the draft is done, what have you seen for when writers come in and like that click of why they are there and why they have gone to your group and they're glad to be there, and not just going it through 3 rounds of $2,000 piece edits with people.
Yeah. A lot of times it's because either they have received
Okay.
feedback or anticipate feedback that they already know
They have
that it's
that gut
coming or that
feeling,
it's gonna,
right?
yeah.
Yes.
But they're like, but what the heck does that mean? What do I
Right.
do with that? And it's often it comes about with really specific elements of craft that they just haven't quite gotten their head around yet. So
Okay.
point of view is one that really
Really?
can be tricky for people, especially if they're doing something with multiple characters and
Okay.
they're just, I think the deeper you get into your own edits, the more that can start to get kind of cloudy
Mm,
and especially if multiple points of view are at play. So we spend some time on point of view. I think a place where a lot of people get frustrated too, especially when maybe sharing their stories with beta readers who are going to be like really honest and really great, but not necessarily being able to kind of hit on the head like why they're feeling that way. This comes up a lot in character development where, yeah, I
oh,
didn't really care about that character. It was kind of flat, but I don't know. And they don't have much more to say about it.
right.
And meanwhile, as the writer, you're thinking, but this character
Yeah.
this has been my best friend for 3 years, right?
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
love this character. And it's because as writers, we know them up here, we know them in our
Yeah. It's not
mind,
getting on the
but
page.
it's not getting on the page. And we
Yeah.
don't always have the objectivity to recognize that
Right.
or necessarily know how to execute that so that it does come on the page. And so
Yes.
so it's oftentimes it's something very specific. And then as we dig deeper, we unearth all kinds of other neat things we can do to make the
Yes.
story
To
even
make it
stronger.
even stronger, right? And
Yeah.
like, just talking about beta readers, because I know that I've been in the indie author industry, as you have, for a while. And it seems to me we started the beta reader thing, like way back when Kindle started. There were not a lot of like freelance editors and
Mhm.
help for indie authors. It was kind of still like, oh, this is a passing trend. This is not gonna work. There were still gatekeepers. So like, you have beta readers to sort of help you get through. But I think it's developed into this way around editing a lot of times. And the problem is beta readers are not editors. They're not trained. So just like you said, they don't have the vocabulary, the words, or the help for you. They just have the gut instinct.
Absolutely. And that is invaluable because I think sometimes, if you're writing an emotional story, getting to see how that's landing with ordinary readers is invaluable. It's so important. And it can make us feel really good and bolstered, like, oh, I hit that goal. And an editor may not be as they're going to be great, but they're going to be doing the technical end of it. They're
Mm-hmm.
not going to necessarily say, this made my heart feel like this, or I wanted to, you
Yeah.
know, kill
They're a
that
little more
guy because
business,
they're more
Yeah.
business because they're doing something different, and the beta reader is really going to give you the
Mm-hmm.
heartfelt response, and that's wonderful. But when a plot point doesn't land with a reader and they don't know how to explain why, that can be frustrating. That
It's
can be
not helpful.
confusing.
It's like,
Yeah. So
help
it's
me.
just exactly. So just knowing what each person's job is,
Yes.
so our expectations are realistic, is
Yes.
very helpful.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I just want to put that out there for people.
Yeah.
It in a pinch, and I know people who have grown beyond beta readers, but just understanding it's just not the same thing, right? So we were talking when you and I met about your approach to editing, and I think the way that you approach editing might change people's ideas on how much they dread editing. So let's talk about how you came up with your approach, and what you how you approach your editing and how you teach the people in your group.
Sure. Well, thank you. That makes me happy. I want it to be fun for people. I really think it's a neat thing. So my approach is not my own original approach. I think it mirrors very similarly that of lots of developmental editors, but I've of course modified it and made it I think really approachable for all kinds of writers and
Mm-hmm.
realistic, that people can take this on and feel good about this approach.
Yes.
So no matter what stage they are in their writing
Yeah.
life. So the way I look at it is I pull it into so let me back up a minute. So what happens usually when somebody comes to me um, who has finished a book? Maybe like I work with people, I do book coaching as well. And so we'll finish the book and they'll feel so excited and they'll feel, ready for the next thing. And they say, I'll be in touch when I've worked through my edits. And then I don't hear from them and I don't
Mm,
hear from them and I check in and they're sad and they haven't touched it and they're like, oh, and all that enthusiasm has gone out the window because they've been sitting alone with 100,000 words and they have no idea what to do next. And I wouldn't, as an editor, I wouldn't know what to do with 100,000 words right there in front of me with no plan. We need a map. And so the way I like to work with people who are interested in self-editing is really breaking out the parts into bite-sized pieces.
mm-hmm.
So in the group, what I do is I have three different um, phases of the editing process. So we look at the macro, micro, and granular level of editing. And we do that in that order. I am sure that I am not alone amongst writers as having been guilty of editing page one 500 times. And oh boy, that first sentence was gorgeous. I don't know how any of the rest of
Well,
it
there's
was,
like
but
whole classes on the first sentence,
right,
right? Like
right.
they kind of, I feel like we're a bit suckered sometimes into these magic bullets, right? Of like, if I can just get the first sentence, then the agent will read it.
Right, right. And while it's really important to get the first sentence, to sparkle and to really work, by the same token, there's a good chance that that first sentence might be eliminated by the time you finish the editing process. And so that's really, it's a little counterintuitive, but that's really at the back end, right? We'll do that later on. At first, we want to look at the macro level of the story. And what that entails is things like it's the things that the agent, that if you're submitting, if you're going to publish traditionally, your agent is going to be foremost looking at narrative drive, your story's structure, your character development. Do these characters feel real? Do we understand what they want? Do they actually go get it? What's the outcome? So all that really fun big picture stuff is what we want to look at first. And
Yeah.
so in our group, we spent about a month and a half really digging into those different elements. And because of that, we're doing some pretty major shape shifting of your
Yeah.
manuscript, right? Things
Yeah.
get moved around quite a
Yeah.
bit. Some things have to go. That's always hard. Some things will be added. That's terrific. Um, so we don't want to get too precious about anything sentence structure wise at that point.
Yeah. That's so true. And that's a hard truth that we have to learn, because the I don't know about you, a lot, and this is something I did as well. The manuscripts that I edit, especially from first time writers, and this was my issue with my first book, is that the character would start out kind of how you saw them at the end. And so the
Mm-hmm.
development was pretty flat, because they're
Right.
already a good person and they're already fine. And
Right.
it's weird because it's not conscious. It's kind of a subconscious thing.
Mhm.
But if that's happening, you will probably toss the first couple chapters,
Exactly.
or they'll appear somewhere else, and that first line is no longer a first line.
You'll never see it again, right?
So
Exactly. And you've just spent 3 months, polishing it. And our brains need something new to attach to each time we sit down at the desk. And so we can burn out really easily when we start to
yeah.
get into that micro editing phase too early on. But the development, the macro level really gives us lots to think about and to just make sure the bones of our story are really in place and they're really working well.
So are you mostly looking at characters at that point, or is it also plot, or what
It's
exactly do you
mostly
consider
plot.
macro?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So we're looking a lot. I mean, well, I shouldn't say mostly. It's equal parts. Lots about character development, the character arc, and then also the narrative arc, because we want those things to work in conjunction with one another. So
Right.
that's the other thing. We want to make sure that your character doesn't suddenly figure everything out in the middle of your book.
Right.
And meanwhile, there's still, things happening in your
Yes.
narrative arc. So we want to make sure things sync up. That's also a time to catch subplots that are not
Yeah.
working. Sometimes we introduce characters in the beginning of our story as minor characters. We're really excited about them, and we throw some adventures their way, and then we somehow forget about
Yeah,
them.
we do.
They're like still back in the burning building, and it's like, right. And so making sure that their arcs
Yeah.
are complete as well. So when
Hmm.
I'm working with clients in this group coaching program, we're actually looking at each arc separately
Yeah.
so that we make sure that they're all aligned with the story and that
Yeah.
they're getting taken care of.
There's this weird thing. Maybe writers have always been like this, but I don't think so, because I think, the book we read during Author Accelerator, the with Fitzgerald working with his editor,
Yes,
he used
yeah,
him mostly like a book coach, where like he was
right,
developing through it. But these days, we're alone, right? We're
right,
writing a book. And unfortunately, when you hit the end, that's kind of just your first draft. Like, it doesn't matter
absolutely.
how much you've gone backwards and edited as you go forwards and backwards. Like, that's actually just your first draft. And that is, and people hate it when I say this, that is when you should sit down and fill out your character arc, because
Mhm.
now you actually know your character. It's, you
Right,
have to be very developed in your skill of writing and storytelling before you are Dan Brown and can just be like, here's my character. I got the 20 sheets for you. Here's the plot
mhm.
line. Here you go. And now write the book. To expect yourself to know how to do that in your first, let's say, 1 to 3 to 4 books, it's kind of crazy. Like, we
Yeah.
put a lot of pressure on ourselves to just
Mhm.
be able to pull this out of thin air. And then we hit the end and we're like, okay, it's ready to be edited.
Right, right,
Not
right,
really,
right.
that's
Absolutely.
that's like perfectionism.
Yeah, because we have to see, we need to see how our characters react to different
Right.
situations that we throw their way. And so, I work with some clients who are pantsers and who are very content to write their way toward their character's
Mm-hmm.
arc, which is what I hear you describing. And it's like, let me see what comes their way. And then when I understand how that impacts their lives, I can go back and make sense of their arc. And then when I work with somebody who's a plotter and who really wants to know all that up front, I'll often suggest to them, okay, for exactly the reason that you're saying, Kat, is like we need to know this person. Let's see what they do if we do this, or let's see if we
Mm-hmm.
do, what happens if this happens. So sometimes by writing some small scenes, we just get a sense of that
Right.
character and
Right.
how
They like
what
become
makes
more
them
robust, right?
exactly,
Like,
exactly.
even if you do plot them out, I mean, I start these days, not on like a zero ghost, transparent ghost, right?
Yeah.
But even if you have things on the paper, like, that's just paper, right? You still have to get into their world, and they have to manifest in front of your eyes as a
Like,
3D 4D person with a soul that like you are going to bring on a journey with. I don't think we give enough credit to the fact that we are creating these characters and out of thin air.
right, right. Isn't that amazing?
It's so amazing,
Yeah,
and to
yeah,
give ourselves some grace and leeway of like, yeah, now I need to go and make it so robust that I'm just so proud of this book. And I know my gut, that's the thing, like that gut feeling, when your gut feeling knows that it's ready to go, it'll be ready to go. Like,
hmm
So when we figure out the character arc and the plot, so you're saying uh, if you apply yourself, it's about 6 to 8 weeks that you give.
Yeah, thereabouts. Yeah, yeah. It's a self-paced
Yeah,
program.
but you
The
could
way
do it
it's,
in
but you
2 months.
could, yeah, yeah. And you could do it in less,
Sure.
it's just, um, but you have, but that's the module is sort of set up with that
Yeah.
assumption. And in there as well, we look at things like stakes, right? Because
Mm.
readers need to invest and they
Even
invest.
women's fiction?
I think so. I think what people think of stakes like, okay, there needs to be a
The
big
bomb.
robbery, there needs to be, an apocalypse. Stakes can be a dinner conversation with
Yeah.
someone, who isn't listening,
Yeah.
right?
You're
It could be,
deciding to get divorced or not get
yeah, or what
divorced.
to
Like,
eat for
yes.
dinner tonight, right?
Yes.
And there's all kinds of subtext beneath that question
Right. An
that
Italian
actually bring,
mama.
yeah, right,
Have you seen
and
that TikTok thing where they're breaking the pasta? I had no idea it was a thing. Wow, that could be a whole state.
totally, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. But if you think about, I'll have writers say to me, I'm just writing this contemporary, I'm writing women's fiction, and it's this sort of quiet, slice of life story. And I don't know if it's boring. To which I say, slice of life done right is never boring because it's so relatable. So we can, if it's done, if the craft is there, the stakes are going to be high. There's, you take this dinner scenario again. Hey, honey, what would you like for dinner? Right? It's on the surface a very benign question. But if we know enough about your characters, we may know that what she's really asking is, why aren't you offering to make dinner? You know what I have on my plate tonight. You know everything I need to do. And he's thinking, what's the right answer?
Yes.
The
Yes.
stakes are all around us, and they happen
Yes.
on very quiet days.
Well,
And
think about the dinner in Pride and Prejudice when the cousin's there and they all know he's there to choose a wife and no one wants him. Like,
absolutely,
or
Jane
Bridget
Austen.
Jones when she's like the one single person and they're all making these underhanded comments.
Right,
Like,
right,
that's
right.
high stakes, right? Like,
Absolutely.
just a weird word that we use that means like building up this tension in that moment in which the character is really going to be faced with something and the reader is going to be like, oh, or having a reaction, right? Like they're going to be
Yeah,
like,
emotionally attached to some sort of outcome,
right.
right? That makes them want to read on. And so that also brings into play the construction of a scene that's going
Mm,
to be compelling. And we look
right,
at
right,
the
right.
macro level as well.
Yes.
So every scene is going to have a mini arc, and it's going
Yes.
to have your character is going to be different at the beginning of that scene and at the end of the scene. Maybe in a really insignificant, seemingly insignificant way. Maybe it
Right.
just means they eventually found their keys,
Right.
in that scene. But because they have their keys, they can go out the door now. And what happens when they get outside? Let's find out.
Exactly.
So it's
Exactly.
it's making sure that our story is a series of scenes that act like building blocks that really carry our story forward.
Right. Right. And I think that's hard to do as you're writing if it's your first couple times. It's a
Absolutely.
lot to hold in your head, right? So I am an overwriter, so I
Hmm.
will end up tossing a lot, but I have friends who are underwriters. So either way, it's hard. You're either going to have to pull out and fix or add and fix, right? Because you just got to get you just got to get the draft done, right? And now we're going
Absolutely.
back and we're making sure the building blocks like connect.
I think it's interesting you say that because I think that one of the reasons people come to editing kind of holding their noses is
Mm,
because they feel like it's the time they show up to find out all the different ways they stink as a writer. Like, these
yeah.
are all the things I've done wrong.
Yeah.
And that's so not what it is. It's
Mm-hmm.
just the second part of when you're painting a wall and you put one coat of paint on the wall. You don't say, boy, I sure don't know how to paint because that paint looks really thin. You say, now it's time to do a second coat of paint.
Yes.
That's what the job requires. And editing is that second coat of paint.
Yes.
It's because if we're thinking about structure too much in that first draft, we're not doing a bunch of other things, right? We can't
Right.
do everything at once. And so these are just steps. They're not really corrections. They're just the next
Yes.
part of the process.
Yes. I
So that
love
high,
that you said that. they're not really corrections. That
No,
it's just it's moving on to the next stage. Like we
exactly.
don't become a doctor in 3 months.
Right,
Like thank
right,
goodness.
right,
Like
right, right. I hope not.
anyone out there who's done that, don't diagnose me. But that's so true. It is literally the next stage. And it's true, the more you do it, the more you it kind of blurs a little bit.
Sure,
But to be
absolutely.
I mean, but there's still a point at which you finish this and then you really edit it. Like I don't know, maybe there's a I don't think so. I've never heard an interview with a well-known author that's like, I just write it and just publish it ever. Like
Right,
that's
right.
just not how things work.
No,
It's just it is a process. It is like people who paint beautiful murals. Like there are several steps, right? And then
there
there's
are
always that
sketches
like
in a notebook first.
yes,
There's just sitting and looking at the landscape they're going to paint. There's so many stages.
yes,
Um, and I would argue, the deeper we dig into each of these stages, the deeper and more meaningful our prose becomes because we've spent time with it and we've
mm-hmm.
grown it mindfully. So
Yeah,
kind of rush through and edit, I think we're ripping ourselves off as artists. I think it's a really
yeah,
meaningful part of the process.
absolutely. So that's macro, and then you
Mhm.
go into micro, you call it?
Then we go into micro.
Okay.
Yeah. And so micro, sometimes people hear micro and they're thinking like commas and punctuate. It's not a punctuation phase. It's
Okay.
getting to that for my process anyway. People use it differently, but when I think about macro, I'm thinking about things like voice. Right? Does my character start out talking like a college professor and end up sounding like a 16-year-old? Is my voice consistent?
Mm-hmm.
I'll get into point of view more with the writer at that level
Okay.
because sometimes point of view is a macro level, like deciding if you're going to do it in first person or third person, but it can also be a micro level where you've basically decided your point of view and then you head hop accidentally. That's a
Mm-hmm.
very easy thing to do to have happen. And so we start looking for head hopping. What I mean by that is getting into too many people's minds in rapid succession and your readers getting whiplash, not knowing, who we're supposed to be identifying with in that scene.
Right.
We're looking at tone, we're looking at your setting. A lot of writers, really smart writers, like to spend a lot of time up in their heads and they're giving us tons and tons of interiority. And we have no idea, where your character is are
Yeah.
they in a house? Are they on a mountain? Where are they? So making setting come to life as a character is important, and then anchoring your character in that setting.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll look at that a lot in that stage. Um,
That's interesting that setting you put in micro. I mean,
mhm,
it makes sense when you say it like that, but I think
mhm.
there are writers who spend a lot of time, sometimes maybe if they're fantasy, sci-fi, kind of depending on the genre, they'll spend so much time on world building, right? They almost like,
Yes.
but I can see how it would be, it's more important at the macro to start at macro and then kind of go back into setting because if you change your characters or your plot line, that's going to change, right? Like your setting.
Yeah. But I'm glad you mentioned that, Kat, because I would say if you're working on fantasy or you're working on some kind of alternative type of universe where the
Mm-hmm.
rules of that society
Yeah.
need some explanation and they're going to drive that plot in a significant way, I think I would want to address that with
Yeah.
people
We need to figure
at a
that
level
out, right?
because it's what's going to drive your plot.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to decide if your character lives in a ranch house or a two-story house, that may become more important as the story progresses. That's
Mm-hmm.
not going to change our experience of your story. It's going to change our experience of the scene
The scene,
and
right?
understanding where we are in that moment. So that's why I think of it more as a micro edit when we're digging into the manuscript.
Mm-hmm.
But it really depends.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a little bit of both is helpful. It depends on
Absolutely.
how prominent that is in your story.
Yeah. But it's good to understand that sort of difference there and at what stage we spend time, right?
Exactly, exactly. Different genres are going to require different things for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, And with that comes also in that micro level subtext, really looking at subtext and what is happening underneath what well, we look at dialogue and then we look at subtext. Your characters are saying one thing, but what do they
Mm-hmm.
really mean? Let's look at their hands and see what they're doing with their hands right now. Oh, they're a little more nervous than the words they're speaking indicate. So we're looking at that kind of underlying subtext
Mm.
at that stage as well.
So kind of micro is going scene by scene almost more than
Yeah, digging a
like
lot.
part by part, I guess, at macro. So you have like the book, the parts, the scenes. Yeah,
And
I
then the
like that.
lines. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, because it is weirdly difficult to keep the entire book in your head as a
Mhm.
writer. So like
Right.
going back and like taking that scene and it's weird how easy it is to start a scene in one way and end it in a completely off, you know, off the rails way. And then you should as a writer go back to it and say, okay, what am I trying to do? What do I have my character trying to do? Right. But if we don't know that we're trying that we need to do that, we just think, well, okay, my character's quirky. I'm like, no.
Right. There she goes again.
There she
Oh,
goes. And social media doesn't help when they're like, my characters just do whatever they want. You're like, well, there is the fun of that, but
hmm.
then there's the like the craft where you go in and you go, okay, character. If that's what you want, then we got to change how you act in the beginning, right? If you're
Right.
a liar, then we need like Loki. The greatest thing, I don't know if my kids really liked Marvel for a while. So the greatest thing about Loki is that he's a con man, right?
Hmm.
So he has to constantly be a con man, but he's
Right.
funny as well. And so you have to constantly be looking at him in each scene of like, what is he doing? And eventually he shows his love for his brother by sacrificing himself, right? But we got to know from the beginning that he does actually love his brother. He's just a liar. you know?
Right, right. And something needs to be on the page that indicates that so that
Yes,
we understand that character's motivation and we're not
right,
assigning our own assumptions as readers onto this
right,
character.
because we will, right?
Right,
That's
right.
what how our brains work.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we kind of have to. So do you kind of encourage writers to kind of looking at the micro level? Are we trying to be editor readers, or are you kind of the whole time trying to teach them to have that take off the writer cap and put on the editor cap?
Yeah, at this stage, I really want them to be wearing their editor reader hat, and
Mm,
thinking about what what does this look like to someone who isn't in
okay.
love with these characters and
Yeah.
hasn't been living with
It's
them for
hard.
2 years,
Right.
and
Yes,
it's
yes,
hard
yes.
to do. And it's always interesting. The other component of this program, the group coaching part of it, is that we all get to know each other really well. It's a very close circle of writers. It's such a good group of people. I look forward to our weekly sessions so much. And it's an opportunity for us to ask questions like, "Oh, what's this
Mm,
scene about?" And it's like you alluded to a minute
yes.
ago. Sometimes people are like, "Oh, I don't know. I just had fun
Yeah.
writing it." Okay, well, there's something in here. Let's find out
Right.
what this scene is
And
about.
what a safe place to do that and
Yeah,
not feel
yeah.
like, what do you mean what's
Right,
about? I
right,
mean, because
right.
that's we all kind of the easy way would be if the reader just tells us what it's about, right? But that is actually our job to find out
Right.
what am I trying to
Exactly.
say through my characters. And
Yeah.
that's nice to not have a stranger
Hmm.
say that, right? You get to know some people, they are on your side, right? And they
Yeah.
are asking you good questions to make you probe deeper into your book and make a better product, honestly, a better story, right? It's always going to help it be better.
Absolutely. And it's just fun to approach our work and have other people approach our
Yeah.
work with curiosity, right?
Yes.
It's not there's something wrong with this. It's I'm curious to know,
Yes.
and it
Yes.
and it just opens up all kinds of new ways to think about
Yes.
our stories and what it is we want to do with them.
Yeah. And what a wonderful thing to be amongst people who are kind of at the same stage as you. We're all, learning how to edit and how to make this wonderful product. And you get to read other, or at least hear about other people's books and know that you're not alone.
Right. And
That
so
is very important.
getting out of that silo, I think is critical as artists. And we've done this since the beginning of time. We didn't always get to hop on a Zoom call, but we've always had writers have always come together to share ideas, to ask questions, to pull each other up.
Yeah.
And I think it's part of being human beings, that
Yes.
we're collaborative,
Yes.
and being able to meet together and do this, I think
We are
is
social animals.
absolutely.
And it doesn't mean that it's not your story. It absolutely is still your story. And I remind people a lot of debut quote unquote authors who hit the New York Times or whatever, they wrote it during their MFA, which is a
Mhm,
group
mhm.
coaching, like basically.
Absolutely,
So you don't
absolutely.
need to feel like you're less of a writer. No,
Mhm.
there are very few writers that, like Fitzgerald is constantly asking his editor for feedback.
Absolutely,
This is
absolutely.
a very strange idea that we've come up with, that people go into a closet, come up with this great idea. Tolkien and Lewis used to chat back and forth, constantly.
All the time. And they read to their children, and their children, they gauged their children's responses to their story.
Right,
And
right.
it's just absolutely, absolutely a social experience.
Yes.
That's just how we work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love that idea. So once we get to the macro, what
Mhm.
do you call the last part?
So we've gone through macro and micro, and then we go
Micro,
to the granular
the
level.
granular.
And
Okay.
that's where we can go back and look at our first sentence.
Yes, it's
Now we
probably
know.
changed.
Yeah, now we know if it belongs. And that's where we're looking. So we've done character, we've done all of our arcs, we've looked at stakes, we've tied up plot holes. That's something
Right.
we look at a lot in the micro level to make sure everything makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And now we want to see how it sounds. And this is
Mm-hmm.
a wonderful, a lot of people really enjoy this part of the process, but they don't necessarily know how to achieve exactly what it is they're striving for. So this is where
Right.
we listen to our writing out loud, and we're looking for
Mm-hmm.
lyricism and cadence. We're looking for sentence structure and variation there. And it's also, and again, this is where it's so helpful to have other people, is I've yet to edit a writer, and I include myself in this completely, a writer who doesn't have some kind of writerly tick where,
Yes.
what, I wonder why this writer uses semicolons this way. This is so interesting,
Yep.
and, somebody who slips into a lot of really, really, really kind of
Yep.
things, or
Yep.
sometimes people who are writing, particularly literary fiction, who are using very elevated vocabulary that stands out. We want to make sure if you're using a word that's really unusual, you haven't used it 45 times, because that starts to feel very,
Yes.
um,
And once you fix a tick, you'll find another.
you will. But once you start to become aware of that,
Yes.
it becomes so much
Oh,
easier.
it's so easy to fix. Like that is definitely granular where you go, okay, I'll fix it later. I
I
just need to get this out first. I love how you sort of make this little pyramid of, at that point, for sure that I wonder if people use granular sometimes to avoid because they
absolutely
know there's a plot hole or there's a character issue, and they're like, but if I could just make it beautiful,
right.
and
Right.
you're just kind of putting off the inevitable. Like, I'll tell, like, this book coming out in 2 months, the first chapter changed 3 times. So
Hmm.
like,
Yep.
once you get to it's fun to figure out the first chapter, as you said, but then if you don't have that stress of there's a plot hole or there's a character problem, it is fun. If you do
Hmm.
have that stress, then it's
We
just
want to put
biding
it
time.
off. But it becomes a lot less stressful when we have tools that
Mm-hmm.
that sort of boil down, and just pull out what the exact problem is.
Yeah.
And then, my goal with this system and with the different tools that I give writers is that the reason that line editing, I don't want to say line editing is easy by any means, but I agree with you completely. Like, once we know what our writerly ticks are, they're easy. You
Yeah.
just pull them out. I want looking for plot holes and narrative drive to feel just as intuitive and just
Yeah.
as straightforward. And we can achieve that when we
Mm-hmm.
take things step by step, and we use some
Right.
of the tools, available
And
to
like you
address
said,
this.
give writers a map, right? Like, like,
Right.
what is my next step? Because as you said earlier, having that this, I mean, usually if you just send it off, you get a 10-15 page letter from an editor. Right? Like
Mhm.
that
Yeah,
still sometimes feels overwhelming. But if you're just trying to self-edit, you go, well, I have a whole book. Where do I even start? So giving them that roadmap of
right,
today, this week we're doing this, next week we'll do that. That just, I can check that off. Okay, I know what I'm doing.
right,
Like, there's
right.
a lot less overwhelm. Okay, this is what I'm looking for. And then I can tell myself as I go through my book, now I'll fix that later because I know that there's a timeline.
Yes, which takes the stakes down. It's like, don't worry, there's gonna be other chances.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I have seen so many writers light up when I explain this process and they say, I can make a to-do list. Yeah, you're
Yes.
to-do list,
Now
right?
I
I
feel
think of
like, okay.
Yeah, because when we're writing, we say, I want to write 500 words this morning. That's my goal, and then I can get out of this chair. And writers who respond well to that get really lost in the editing process because there aren't those really clear,
Right. You can't just
those
edit 500 words.
right? Like that's not how our brains work.
Yes.
And so they sit down and they go, "Oh, I guess I have to fix my book today." And that's not
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
not a directive that anybody can really do anything with.
No.
So by having these points, it's like, "Oh yeah, you can make your spreadsheet, you can chart your goals, you can do all those things that make you feel good and
Yes.
productive."
Yes, absolutely. And even if you're not a checklist person, just understanding that timeline, like you said, having that, okay, what does editing even mean?
Right,
Like,
right, right, right. And
uh,
that when you have done these things, you'll know you've finished, right? Because there's
yes.
always that
Oh, what a
question, how
great
do I know
idea.
I'm done, right?
Yes.
So it's
Yes.
like you're done. You're done.
Yes. And now
Yeah.
you can start pitching it. That's
Mhm.
that's wonderful. So how does the group work? Do you have like a launch time? Can people come in whenever? How long do they stay? Like, so how does it work?
So those questions, you remind me of myself when I was planning this group. I was asking all those
What do we
questions.
do?
I sounded like, right. What I ended up settling on was I work with a lot of I work with writers at really all stages of their career. So I work with award-winning writers. I work with people who have never really sat down to write their story yet, but they've had it in their minds for a long time. And I really love working with people at all these different stages. And I
Hmm.
wanted to design a group that um, would like really celebrate that because
Hmm.
I think all of those different kinds of writers have things to learn from each other.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to get people who are at different stages of their careers, who have different kinds of questions, and who would all come together and we could really learn from each other. And so that ends up even transferring to having people at different stages of the course so
Mm.
that one person's on module one person's on module three. That conversation becomes really interesting because
Yeah.
although it makes sense strategically to go through the modules in order, it's really helpful to kind of hear what's on the other side of the
Yes.
module you're working on because it gives you that faith of like, okay, this thing I'm worried about, Rebecca's got me covered. We're doing it in module three.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
and you just starts to plant seeds for what's ahead. So that's a long-winded answer. Let me now answer it in a more straightforward way. So people are able to join the group whenever it works for them.
Okay.
The way it works is I will set up a discovery call with people who are interested so we can really make sure that this is the right place. Sometimes people are so afraid of finishing their book that this becomes like another thing to do before you take it to a developmental edit, right? And it's like, no, no,
Hmm.
you are ready for a developmental edit.
Hmm.
So we will talk about that. We will talk about whether this group is going to support them and move them forward so that they get to
Right.
that stage. Um, and then the way the group is designed is if you are a person who maybe you have some deadlines, you have an agent waiting for this, or you're ready to self-publish and you've got a due date, you can complete the course in 4 months.
Wow.
But
Okay.
yeah, so I wanted it to be, to really honor people's timelines. But a lot of people are there for craft and they
Yep.
just want to stay longer
Yeah.
and we build a really nice community. So for those people, They stayed for 4 months at the regular tuition price, and then I knock off 50% once they've finished the modules. So that's motivation to get the modules done, and
Yes.
then to stay with us and show up and share what you're doing and participate in our group calls and in our online forums. So it's kind
Right.
of a mix of people who are at different stages,
Right.
which is fun.
And it sounds to me like um we're kind of on the same page where it's not just for people who are starting. Like every book, I like to say, is it's a new project and it's the same thing and
Mhm.
you'll have the same self-doubt. And yes, on one hand it will get better, but if you struggle with timelines or with motivation or encouragement or whatever, there is no like I think sometimes when people are like, I already have 8 books out, like they almost feel ashamed of going into
Mhm.
groups where it's just like, no, this is just craft. This is just relearning it. Maybe you read a book 8 years ago, but like, let's just get back into it, find the fun again, maybe find the community, maybe find a different
Absolutely.
process. Like, it doesn't have to be your first book, right?
And absolutely, I mean, if we're doing it right, we're always stretching ourselves. We
Right.
are always trying things that make us a little bit uncomfortable. So I work with some writers who are very well published, but they've never written from first person before. They're
Oh,
a little
yes.
nervous about it, or they have dual timelines and they're not quite sure how that works, but they've got awards and they've
Yeah.
got, and they could probably be coaching someone themselves. But they're doing something that's outside of their comfort zone and they want
Mm-hmm.
to and they're excited about that and they want to know everything they can know about it. And
Yes.
that's always a lot of fun to work with. Um,
Absolutely.
so yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We all learn from each other.
Exactly. Exactly. And there's always something more. I don't know. Like sometimes I feel like you can't hold it all in your head. So when you get to that state, you almost have to remind yourself, like I'm doing this now, I'm doing editing. What should I be looking? And so, yeah, I'm being in a group a lot of times, depending, especially if you have a very busy life, can kind of help you structure that, right? And get it and reduce that overwhelm. It sounds like then just like, what do I do today? Oh.
Right, right, right. Yeah, we too in our community we'll set goals, right, where people can announce what their goal is for the week ahead.
Hmm.
And then I check in with them on Friday to see how it went.
See if they did
And
it. Yes.
yeah, and just that accountability. And just I think sometimes when it's up in our head, it's really confusing. And when we start typing it to a group, we have to make sense of it. And
Yeah,
we
so
hear
true.
ourselves like, oh, that is not a fair expectation of myself. That is not
Right.
realistic that
Right.
I'm going to do such and such. And so I think just the exercise of writing it down is
Hmm.
amazing and really helpful to writers. And then we've got your back,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. That's so cool. It sounds like a really fun group, and I love
it's
the way
very
that it's
fun.
structured.
Thank
So
you.
it sounds like a great thing for everybody, honestly. We'll just inundate your group. But so we're gonna have the link below in which they are booking a call with you in order to talk to you more about the group and about their
Yeah,
book.
see if
Okay.
it's a fit. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
the other things that you do, we'll have a link to rebeccapickens.com. Are there other things that you do, or are you just
Yeah,
focusing
I
on the
do all
group?
kinds of things. It's so fun. I have the best job. I'm sure you feel that way too, Kat. We have fun. Yeah, I do one-on-one book coaching for those who want to have a little bit more specific line by line feedback, right? Because we
Hmm.
can't do that in the group coaching. We do a lot of other things, but we don't do line by line editing. I do developmental editing, and then I also am really excited. This is an opportunity just to get to know each other a little bit more and to enter my community at no cost. Every week, I have a writing sprint that
Mm,
we do, and I offer it at a lot of different times so that we can get people from different time zones in there. And
sure.
we write together for an hour. We usually start with a little check-in and then we write for an hour, but then we show back up on camera at the end just for a minute, just to go, we did it, and
Yep.
just that accountability at the end. And yeah, it's a nice group. People come back over and over. So it's got a nice
Nice.
cozy feel to it. And so I think I have a link. I think I've given you a link for that. But if I haven't, you can reach out to me at any of the other places and I can give
Absolutely.
information about that.
Well,
But I would
that's
love if people
fun.
would join me there. It's fun.
You got all the sides of being an author figured out for everyone.
It is a good life, and I think whatever we can do to all support each other and at all the different stages um,
Absolutely.
is valuable.
It is. It so is. It's been really fun talking to you.
It's been
And
so fun, Kat. Thank you so much for the
yeah,
opportunity.
yeah, absolutely. We'll have you on again. We'll check in at some point, I'm sure. So
I would
have a
love
great
that.
day.
Thank you so much, Kat. You too.